let me first say good evening and welcome to everyone. I am Ed. I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Badger. We provide super practical advice for product managers and product teams. And we are absolutely delighted to have Petra with us this evening to talk about product leadership and making that journey. And if any of you don't know Petra, then she is a independent product leadership coach based in Hamburg, as we discussed. She's the author of Strong Product People, which is, I guess, one of the kind of best known and best full stop books on product management. She's also designed assessment and coaching frameworks like the Product Leadership Wheel, which we're going to touch on quite a bit this evening. And she organizes Products at Heart conference, which is one of the leading product conferences in Europe, and also runs the All Things Product podcast with Teresa Torres. I mean, like, you are the products ecosystem in Europe, pretty much single-handedly. So yeah, tonight we're talking about like what changes when you go from being an individual contributor to leading other people, and why a lot of people find that transition difficult. I know it was certainly like a bit of a shock for me, and it's something that I try and kind of tell people about and help people through as well, having gone through it. Petra, you've kind of like coached lots of people through that transition, and really excited to hear your advice on it. So thank you for being here and welcome.
My pleasure. So many amazing people, so late in the evening. I appreciate that hours tonight. And thanks for having me, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm maybe we just dive straight into it. We said we'd talk about this transition between individual contributors and leaders.
Mhm.
You've seen, as we said, like a lot of people go through that transition. What are the sorts of things that are usually going wrong, or why do people find that transition difficult?
Yeah, that's a good leading question. An obvious one, but yeah, let me try to unpack it. So I think it is hard for multiple reasons. And the first question that I usually need to ask when people say like, "Hey, I'm in this transition," is the question of why that they applied for actually this next step in their career. Or, and that's the most common case, somebody came and asked, "Hey, we have an open team lead position. Could you maybe apply for it? Or could you consider stepping up and basically taking that position?" And that's already two different things, because if you preparing yourself for making that next move, and if you're consciously looking for to make that next move, then you're already aware of some of the changes that you might need to make. Where if somebody says like, would you be willing or would you be interested in becoming a product lead, team lead, whatever you director, so many titles in product leadership, but you would be managing product people. I think this is the important part, right? And maybe, yes, designers too, and maybe, yes, some user research folks too. But in general, you would be becoming a line manager of product folks out there. Um, and if you just like are promoted in that role, the transition is even harder. If you ask for an opinion before you are promoted into that role and you have this internal application process, maybe that sometimes helps you to prepare a bit better and to understand the role a bit better. But let's face it, most of the higher product executives are oftentimes not good in explaining either. So you just becoming a leader. And this is not well defined what it actually means, let alone well prepared. Because, for example, I have this one thing that I always tell people to start with if they consider to become a product leader at some point, and that is practicing the art of giving feedback, both praise and criticism. Because that is already helpful in your product role while you're still an individual contributor before you're actually making the move. And this is such a critical muscle to build before you actually are in a leadership position. So that's something that I to do, find the skills that you can practice while you're still in an IC level position. Yeah, long-winded answer to your first initial question, Ed.
No, that's great. And I sorry, I probably should have mentioned right at the start, like the format for this evening. I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to ask Petra, so we'll do a bit of a what do you call it, fireside chat,
Kickstart. Yeah.
a kickstart the conversation, and then we will open up the floor for questions. But if you do have questions, please do that you think are kind of relevant to what we're talking about, do stick them in the chat, and I'll try and weave them in where natural.
Yes, please.
Um, but I think it'd be like really useful. Like certainly one thing I didn't really realize that as an individual contributor was like how different the roles were. Like for someone that doesn't have that perspective, like they haven't been a manager before. Like what would you describe as kind of like the main activities of an IC versus being a head of or a manager? Like why are they different?
Yeah. So let's assume there is not much of a transition time, which is sometimes the case, and we can double tap of that on that if we want to. But given you kind of, let's say you change companies and you have been in an IC level role in the company, and now you decided to become a product team lead in your next company, right? So what is changing then? I think the big difference is that you are no longer, and now I'm using the shipyard metaphor that you already mentioned, Ed. You're no longer working with the team building the products of the company. In my metaphor, that's the boats and the ships and the sailing yachts and the vessels and whatever you call them. But you now should be focused more on the shipyard around them. So, are my teams set up in the right place? Am I taking care of the people that are working on the shipyard? Am I taking care of the ship? So, am I clear about where we headed, directional clarity wise? So, is there enough structure in my personal thinking that I can provide all these people with this directional clarity, or one could call it strategy or product vision? So, that needs to be taken care of as well. And then, last but not least, you have to have an operating model that you think yeah, how you would operate with your product organization, because now it's not only you and a few developers working on a product and orchestrating that work. Now you're orchestrating the work of an entire, or you're hopefully not orchestrating, but you need to have a way of orchestrating portfolio view, making sure that the teams have a bit of rhythm and rituals that are similar to each other, not necessarily the same. I'm not a fan of leadership coming in and dictating everybody how they should actually work. That's, I think, an anti-pattern. But still, there needs to be a bit of rhythm and rituals to some of the product work, and you need to have a framework or operating model for that in place. So on the high level, it's really this people, process, and product kind of separation that I usually use. And then if we talk a bit more about this 12 leadership responsibilities that I think are key.
Yeah, and I'd love to get into that. Like for me, I'm really glad you mentioned like a an operating model. That again was one of those terms that I
Mhm.
feel like when you know. Like, but before you know, like how do you describe that for someone who
Ah,
doesn't
yeah.
sort of like have that sense of like what a product operating model is?
Yeah, so my simplest way of explaining that is picture a series of task boards. So you work with an agile team, for example, then you have a task board, and your task board is a bit of your operating system structuring the work. And task boards usually come with a series of rituals. So let's say you have a daily stand up where you check in on how things are going and moving on your task board, and you have a day plan for putting stuff on your task board. And in the end, you have a meeting plan for checking in how much did we achieve in this iteration that we planned, right? So that's the simplest way of to do, doing, done task board that usually agile teams are having. But think that scaled to more teams and then to these phases of delivery, discovery, portfolio overview, and an additional layer of idea to opportunity assessment. Because let's face it, ideas are coming from everywhere in the organization. Senior executives, after being at a golf tournament and talking to random other CEOs, then it's from within the organization, it's from peers, it's from stakeholders, it's from your development team, and customers usually have a say in that as well, have ideas and are actually asking for features to be implemented. So you need a place to collect all these ideas, and then you need an assessment that helps you qualify these ideas and see if they are worth investigating. Not worth building in the first step. For me, it's more like, do we want to invest in further discovery of this idea? And so that's, for example, the easiest way how I could describe an operating model. So it's task boards, it has different columns, session of things. Everybody has clarity where are things moving and how are things moving. Everybody has clarity about who's responsible for moving stuff on which level. We have our meetings. Attached to each of those task boards. They have obviously different iteration lengths. So the doing task board might be a 2 week sprint, where the idea to opportunity assessment maybe is a quarterly initiative. But how the work gets done needs a bit of a structure, and that is one part of it. There is communication guidelines, usually in product operating model. There's product principles, usually somewhere in your product operating model more to it than what I was just talking about. But that's the easiest way how I could briefly describe what the product operating model is all about.
Yeah, yeah, super. That's really clear. Thank you. And you talked about sort of like the responsibilities, the sort of like things that you have to do change. That's the analogy between you go from building ships to running the
Hmm.
shipyard. Um, you've created this product leadership wheel to,
Hmm.
I guess, like help people understand what are the expectations of management and also assess like how they're doing there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, exactly. So, product leaders for about 6 years now. And I always had my way of looking at their role. And I had a structure to my coaching mural boards, for example, right? When I was using it. But at some point I was like, okay, this is not company agnostic enough, and this is not industry agnostic enough. And can I maybe come up with leadership responsibilities for product leaders, right? So not for every leader on the planet, but for people in product leadership positions that I could use in coaching situations that maybe people could use for self-assessing them to find, I call that learning headlines. So what should I learn next, or where should basically my attention and focus go next? So that's another question that I often have in coaching. And then a year and a half ago-ish, I started to work on this product leadership wheel. And then I found another reason to do that. And that was because I was asked to deliver a conference talk on managing up. And for that conference talk, I had to reflect on, okay, if I want to talk to people about how they could manage their boss in better ways, I think it first would be beneficial for them to understand what they expect from a product leader. So that gave me another segue into this topic of, okay, what is product leadership actually all about? There are a few books that are touching on the topic, but I couldn't find a structured assessment for that. And in case people are familiar with my other framework, which is called Product Management Wheel, PM Wheel, that is published and available out there for free for quite some time. It comes with a lot of questions. So, are you as a product manager able to do this? Are you as a product manager able to do that? So, I used a similar format for the product leadership wheel. You as a product leader taking care of this particular thing? And are you already looking into that particular task, right? So I'm rather prescriptive in the things that a product leader should actually look into a lot. But that left me with, I don't know, I think it's 400-ish questions. So they needed structure. And the high level structure that I always used and that I used in my book, for example, is this people product process that we were already talking about. But there was not enough of structure for 400 concrete questions that I had. So, and then I tried to find another set of, yeah, head clusters that actually could work. And I landed on this 12 leadership responsibilities when it comes to product leadership. Yeah, and one of them, for example, and we already hinted towards that one is this kind of feedback culture and recognition. So that is one set of responsibilities. So you need to be able to provide people with meaningful feedback, and not only able, you should have a process around providing people with feedback. And does that need to be a super complex process? Maybe not. Maybe it's a calendar entry every once in a while to think about both and helpful growth feedback, I could call it. Sometimes we even have to deliver this poor performance related feedback in a leadership position. Um, and that, for example, would be one of these responsibilities. If you want to, I could do a quick screen share, then we could look at the wheel together. Is that fine? Okay.
I think that'd be great. Yeah, I think people would love that.
Then let me do this. People say, like, yeah, what she's actually talking about, give it to us, Petra. So let me see. Can you see it properly?
Yes,
Okay. So as I already said, it's people, it's ways of working. It's I put integrity and ethical leadership in the core and in the center of everything, because I think as a product lead, you have to have your own moral compass, your set of values that you personally think are important in product leadership, and that should guide your product leadership work. So that's why that responsibility lives in the core of the entire wheel. And then around it are the other responsibilities. And for example, what I was already talking about is this feedback culture and recognition. Then let's start with the people one, because that's usually the easier one. So there should be role clarity, should be clear. So you should have an idea of what good product management looks like. You should have your definition of good. If you line managing product managers, you should be able to explain them how you hold them, or yeah, what is the blueprint you hold them against, right? And say like, hey, look, this is what I think a good product person does. This is what you're currently doing. So you need to have that handy, and you need to be sure that you made clear who's responsible for what in your organization. Then it's the team building and development. So usually you need to hire people, and you have to hire the right people, and you have to coach them towards excellence. You have to have your one-on-one, the people bucket here. Then you should be deliberate in creating your product organizations, or even your company's product culture, right? So, and that is a hard one, because people, like fish by water, are surrounded by the product culture that you create. So it's super hard to question them and ask them about what cultural aspects are most meaningful to them. So you have to reverse engineer that a bit if you inherit the product culture. So if you're joining a company and it's already there, it's usually the actions that they see leadership take. It's usually the decisions and how decisions are made. It's the rhythm, how things are celebrated. So, but you want to make sure that you understand how the company culture is when it comes to product management. And then you, as a second order, yeah, consideration, you need to design it yourself how you would like it to be. Then networking support and conflict management, that's a super interesting one. Not a lot of product leaders are doing this, but sometimes you are living on these higher altitudes, and sometimes it's easier for you to see whom your product managers should talk to. For them, it's sometimes not obvious. Maybe in bigger corporate organizations, they haven't even thought about reaching out to a particular. So that's oftentimes stating the obvious. So you see it, they don't. So help them make meaningful connections and bonds within the organization. And sometimes it's a bit of conflict handling as well. If there's kind of more than healthy friction with one or the other stakeholder, then they might need your help with that. Then I think empowerment through trust and autonomy is an important responsibility. That's basically what everybody's talking about all the time. Marty in his book Empowered, and we with dedicated standing teams and all these kind of things. So how do you set up those teams in a way that they not rely on your oversight all the time? How do you empower? How do we make sure they can be trusted? Are they aware of how they can earn your trust? So what does need to happen that you can grant them a certain autonomy? That's the people part of product leadership. Now you could ask, Petra, why is this just like 1/4 of your wheel and not more? Glad you're asking. So I call this the ideal basic average. So without me knowing about your company or your context, this is what I usually see time distribution wise for product leaders. Approximately half of their time in product, right? In thinking about the direction the products are hopefully heading in. So that's the product strategy and the product vision. That's the higher level product discovery, because to create a strategy, you have to do some discovery initiatives as well, right? What's the market? What's the competitors doing? What are the big trends out there? And all of that helps you to provide people with directional clarity, for example. And then another one is this product success bit. So are we measuring how successful our products are? Are we keeping track of that? Are we using that in discussions? That could be your KPI trees, your metrics, OKR sets. So that's the product success part. And I was talking about task boards in the beginning. So I usually advise every product leader to make sure that the teams have this product success conversation as well, right? That could be another thing that you could be doing, making sure the teams are discussing if the features, if the product additions that they deliver had the outcome everybody was hoping for. And then there is peer and executive alignment, which is an important one because usually you have a peer in your CTO, Chief Marketing Officer, when you were the CPO, you need to form meaningful bonds with them as well. You need to align with them on your strategy, right? So you don't do this in isolation. So that's a big part of the job. And that's why that is half the wheel. So usually that takes more space than the people work. Unless, for example, you're a product lead in a startup and you're scaling the team tremendously, then of course the people part is bigger because then you're in hiring mode all the time. So then the wheel would look different time allocation wise. And last but not least, the ways of working. There's this process of making sure stuff gets built, basically, stuff gets delivered, stuff gets done. Then that everybody has the right resources and support that they need. And that, for example, could be training, right? AI. Everybody needs to wrap their head around AI these days. So are you product people having enough support or, for example, time? The resource could be time. Grant them a bit of free time to look into these new ways of working. And then last but not least, and we already talked about it, feedback. So that is basically the 12 leadership responsibilities that I could identify and how they're all playing together. And if you're now making you're naturally overwhelmed by me throwing all of these things at you. But hopefully, your boss has something along these lines somewhere. You definitely should ask them in an onboarding process to say, like, hey, what do you think are my main responsibilities? Hopefully, they have something as structured. Um, or something a bit more looser, but now you have seen something more structured. So then you can maybe iterate your way to something that is really helpful when in onboarding.
I love it. I love it. Tell us a bit more like when is this kind of framework useful both for an individual and for an organization as a whole? Like how do you like now that we understand the different dimensions, how would we actually use this?
Ah, glad you asked. I can just jump to the next slide if you want me to. So as if I would have prepared it, which is not really the case, but still. Um, so I think it's most helpful in self-assessment cases, and that's what so one thing that I would like to avoid is that people use it for benchmarking product leads against each other. This is not what I created a framework for. So it is really all about this assessment. So where am I currently at? Where is my energy flowing towards? Where's my focus right now? And is it on the right things? Because let alone with these time assessments, so look at your calendar, think about how much of your times and meetings are falling into which bucket. And that already helps you to get an idea of, am I currently actually investing my time wisely, or is it just like, am I just driven by what other people put on my calendar, for example? So that's where it could be really helpful. And then I really find it helpful in this leadership team alignment stuff because has the CTO reflected what the product leadership person usually does? Oftentimes not. So you could help it to explain your role to others. Then again, in coaching and development conversations, because you might have performance review sessions with your boss, right? And such thing like the product leadership wheel would help you with preparing these feedback conversations as well. And the time allocation is an important thing. Yeah, as well, that I usually, so that's the main use cases that I use it for. And then I used it for a few clients where HR reached out and HR said, like, Petra, I think our product leadership role descriptions are outdated. Can we just like build on your wheel? So that's another use case when big corporate organizations want to have improved role definitions for product leaders. Yeah, but I think currently most of the people that using it are using it for the self-assessment case. Every once in a while, they schedule a personal check-in with themselves, and then they basically, yeah, do that assessment.
Yeah, great. I was going to ask how it's related to a competency ladder or something like a competency framework. And so,
Yeah, yeah. Let me double click on the. Yeah, so that's a tricky one. And I already had that with the product management wheel because companies have the tendency to say, like, okay, but now we have to distribute all your responsibilities across the associate, junior, mid-level, senior, platinum career ladder that we're having. And I'm always resisting that I'm part of that discussion because I think that is something that a company has to solve. And these roles differ so much from organization to organization. So me as an external party can I can contribute to that in a consulting setup, I'd say. Then I have opinions and can give advice, I think. But I
mm,
cannot create something that it just can copy and paste and use within the organization. So that's why both wheels are career ladder agnostic.
yeah, super. One more question from me then before I kind of throw it
Mhm.
open to the floor. For people who are preparing to make that jump, you've outlined you've got these 12 kind of things that people should be thinking about that they're, responsibilities or kind of tasks that they should be taking on as managers. Um, you talked about the importance of kind of practicing feedback. Have you got any other tips for people who are kind of prepping to make that transition? Like, where should they be spending their time? How can they make their kind of their case to be a leader as strong as possible?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest thing is to let go of some of the detailed work when you stop being an individual contributor and are in a leadership position, right? Because things feel more uncertain. So you oftentimes have fewer information at hand, but still need to make the call. So that is something that you can practice or at least start reflecting. So okay in making decisions in absence of a ton of data, for example. How do I do this? How can I learn this? How can I get more reliable data, for example? So this kind of can I stand uncertainty is definitely can I dance with uncertainty a bit more? That's one thing. And then you can practice meta, I would say. So practice lifting yourself out or one level higher, looking at the broader picture. Look, and you can start this in the IC level situation, right? So, for example, if there is a portfolio alignment meeting, volunteer the portfolio alignment meeting and then see what people are discussing, what questions are leaders usually asking. So observe what your product leaders already do in certain meetings and learn from that. It's not necessarily the case that all product leaders are a great example to learn from. I have to break that to you, but some really are. And if, by the way, there is nobody in your organization who you would consider being a great example for your product leadership skills, then maybe go find somebody externally in a community event, right? Go attend a community, see if you can find somebody. These days, a lot of product leaders are visible out there, still on LinkedIn, talking about what they currently have on their mind or what they internally think about. Some of them share at conferences, so you definitely could learn from conference talks where practitioners um, are sharing their stories. So that's definitely something that you could do. And then last but not least, reflect on product culture elements. I wrote a blog post on that. I maybe can dig it out at some point. And I talked about the elements of product culture and how you can influence it. And I think this is another thing that engineers. So just observe your surrounding, your current organization, and then see what they're already doing, and maybe then make up your mind on what's good, what's missing, what could be improved. And already that would help you practice product leadership without even having the mandate.
Yeah, amazing. Well, look, like I say, I want to give everyone else plenty of time for questions as well. So I'm going to throw it open to the floor. I already see a couple of questions in the chat, which I'm sure you can go to. Anyone else, please just either use the raise hand button, which is in if you see the react button at the bottom of the screen in Zoom, then you can raise your hand. And so we can um, not have people talking over each other, or just fit your question in the chat, and I'll let Petra kind of take them in turn. So Petra, I think there's one from Mohammed, which is he's asking, how do you build an emotional firewall when you're receiving bad news from the team under stakeholder pressure? He wants to know how you can absorb the hit without letting that stress bleed into the team's morale or your own decision-making clarity.
Ooh, that's a good one, Mohammed. Thank you for that. Um, yeah, that's indeed the job is to make sure everybody stays sane. And you oftentimes have to bit of an emotional firewall in that situation. And that's the hard part of the job, and it's hard to prepare for that exact reason. I'm not sure if I fully understood the stakeholder to team relationship in that question, but just let me assume stakeholder was hoping for something to be finished by one particular exhibition that they wanted to show the thing. I don't know, random made up case. And then the team, for example, is now not able to deliver. In an ideal scenario, team and stakeholder would have a relationship where you as a product leader would not need to step in. So that's the ideal scenario. If it's the stakeholder of the team, the product person of that team should have made sure that they know their stakeholders well enough and they have formed strong bonds in times of peace, so to say, that now that we have a conflict or an incident, it's not a problem to actually solve that. If it still is, and if they have not been able to form that meaningful bond, maybe they're new to the team, maybe it's not on them to blame, right? I saw don't blaming it on the product person. Um, then sometimes the product leadership person has to step in. And our first goal then is to not make it personal. So we don't want to make it personal. It's not the sales team against the product team or something like that. It's all about what are all of us currently trying to achieve. So find a KPI, find a goal that is written somewhere, hopefully, that you then can again bring everybody in and say, like, is everybody still trying to solve for this particular problem? Then hopefully everybody's nodding. And then you do a bit of not even post-mortem, but you need to analyze what went wrong, where it went wrong, and how you could focusing on still achieving that goal if possible, or achieving something that is as close to that goal as possible. And sometimes it's kind of in the long run, the team has to plan for more slack time because they constantly overpromising and undercommitting. Then you have to make clear to the team that this is no longer a good behavior. And you have to promise to the stakeholder that it will never happen again and make sure it never happens again, right? Or if it's not so much a structural problem, but it's a one-off, then it's, I think, more on you to have the conversation and say, like, hey, look, this is what happened. Everybody tried to avoid it, still it happened. So how can we recover from that and what can we still do? But the most important part is really make it as less personal as possible, find goals or whatever artifact helps you to bring everybody back in and say, like, hey, look, this is actually what we all want to achieve here. I think that actually helps. And then yeah, make sure everybody understood things could happen, things could slip. And if it's a systemic problem, then tackle your systemic problem and not make it a one-off solution. Hope there was something in there.
Super. Sylvia's asking if you could talk a little bit more about the social skills that you need to sort of be a good leader, and how do you develop those?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. So I usually don't see this being a massive issue for people that have been in a product role before, because let's face it, to pick a product career and to stay with the product career for some time, you need to be an empathic person, right? Because we usually struggle more with the opposite. We really customers and we love all the ideas that everybody's having and we love all our colleagues and it's so hard for us to say no to things, so this usually is more what I see. um, I see the occasional random person being promoted into the product leadership position. um, and for them, I would always advise to start with the user, to really see them struggling, to really observe how they're using the product. And that really is a super humbling experience. So that's hopefully what creates empathy. If people don't have any, then I question if they should be at all. But back to your question of how can you practice is a bit more. I think it really helps if you read some of the non-product leadership books, right? So Radical Candor, for example, did help me to understand a lot about how can I provide people with meaningful feedback, even in times when it's not positive feedback that I have to deliver. And I know it's a rather US flavored book, and that's why you may want to read Culture Code or Culture Map to learn more about, okay, if I'm working in an intercultural team, how would I need to tailor my messaging to and people from different backgrounds. I just a few weeks ago had a session with some colleagues from India, Norway, and the US in one workshop. And and the German was facilitating. So there was a bit of a challenge, right? And you need to prepare these things again, you're no longer doing this as an amateur. When in a product leadership position, you should train like a pro athlete. So learn more about the soft skill stuff, and it's really books that I would recommend. And of course, you still could pair with or ask what are the next things that you should be learning. But I think this having critical conversations, providing people with feedback, inspiring people with storytelling, that will be a super critical thing to work on. Um, all these kind of things can be found in management book coaching, for example, Michael Bangray-Stainer, amazing coaching books, generic coaching advice, not product related. So that is where I actually would be starting. And then you can build that over time, that muscle, because that's another thing. You don't better or you don't build the muscle from just reading the book, right? So you read one book at a time, practice a few of the things that the book is advising you to do, then half a year later read the next book, because otherwise you're not building the skill really. Then it's just like surface level. Yeah, 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 yeah. Read the book, understood what they're talking about, but it's not changing your leadership. So make sure you really think about actions that you could take, stuff that could help you practice these things that the books are actually advising you to do. For example, in Radical Candor, she talks about your weekly practice of praise. So why not having this little reminder to say like, hey, can I say one nice every person on my team about one particular thing they really did well this week? And I think that is how you change your leadership practice over time.
Great. So question from Fetten, who's asking, could you describe more what product leadership looks like in different contexts? And they're particularly interested in, does this look different if you're in a corporate environment, but building a 0 to 1 product?
Yeah. Massively different. Um, so if it's a 0 to 1 product, you're basically a product manager. So if you do maybe there's only you, right? Then and then the tricky part is that you have to free up enough time to build the team while you're building your 0 to 1 product. And that is a super hard position to be in. Been there, done that. Um, because you want the product to still find product market fit most often. So still money needs to be made. It's still not really, the business case is not proven yet, maybe, or something like that. And while you're doing that, and while you figure that out, and while you're working with the team, and I know the teams get smaller because of we all working differently in times of AI, but that doesn't make things easier because you know yourself how to build products. And now, with all these vibe coding tools at hand and all this context engineering that you constantly need to do. So, you need to learn that as well on top of it. And you need to make sure you have enough time to maybe put a meaningful role description out there, a job ad, and then you need to hire candidates. And that's a lot of time on your calendar if you interview candidates. And maybe you do it in a short and sweet way and only have 3 interviews with them lined up, but still, right? So, this is if you are in a more 0 to 1 situation, where in a corporate setting, it's so much easier and harder because you have peers. So then there are maybe like 25 product directors, right? And all of them have like 6 direct reports. And you can learn from them. Usually, there's some of them are more senior than you, and you can ask for advice. Maybe there's even a small product leadership community of practice that to, and that's not rare, right? In a corporate setups, that's oftentimes where I'm speaking these days, is all the annual kickoffs of all the product leadership communities of practice. So big organizations have those, but then you have the political level or layer. So you need to be way more political. You need to walk the floors a bit more, even if it's digital. And you need to really have these meaningful bonds again. You need to do a lot of networking to understand who do I need to convince of something before I can make a move? Where can I make the move? And then saying like, sorry, we had to make the move afterwards. And of that, that's an entirely different beast when it comes to product leadership. Still, the wheel and the responsibilities remain the same, right? Just the time distribution may be heavily different.
Yeah, super. Thanks. A follow-up question from Mohammed, who's asking, what are the most effective ways to build social and political capital during sort of like the good times, during peacetime, so that when a crisis hits or you have a hard pivot, you've got the sort of the, almost like reserves of those to be able to push through.
Yeah, hang out with people. I know it's super hard nowadays when companies are set up entirely remotely and stuff like that. But sometimes companies still invest in bringing everybody in twice a year or something like that. So nothing beats having beers together, basically. So if you can, by any means, do that. If you can't, then still an intro call goes a long way, especially if you're new to the company. Then why not having short intro calls with a lot of people, listen to the things that they actually say, and then what they actually say, where they're coming from, understand how and how they are rewarded within the organization. I think this is a super important part because if you understand how they're motivated and rewarded, it's way easier for you. And that's the next point. early wins. We need some early wins for everybody you're in touch with. So it could be the smallest thing, the smallest token of appreciation, or the smallest token of, hey, this is something that I did for you, that will create a certain level of trust in peace times. And I know that this is a lot of work already. So when in onboarding, that is about what are the stakeholders that I should talk to. That's why I sometimes advise people to draw a stakeholder map and to say like, hey, that's all the people in the organization that are relevant to my work and that are relevant contact or stakeholder people for the team that I'm managing. And then think about who are the ones that you should really talk to actively, ask for feedback, have the regular walks around the building, have the small wins, and then make sure that they hear about them and that they see them. So here, token of appreciation. Um, and that's a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but I think it does go a long way and it really helps in more peaceful times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a related question here potentially from Nitin, who's saying, yeah, they've been selected as a product lead amongst a group of product managers who are all very talented, very capable, and all obviously wanted that role as well. So how do you step up into that role as a leader and lead, a bunch of people who used to be your peers, and particularly when the company might not be growing that fast, the business might be volatile, and there might not be other opportunities for them to make a similar move anytime soon.
Yeah, that is um short answer is acknowledge their pain. So the first thing that you do is really make sure that everybody understands that you understand the absurdity of the situation. I think this is the important first step and say like, and my answer would vary depending on the fact if you got the so everybody applied for it, then you got the job. Was it transparent how the process? So that would be my question, right? So how transparent was it to your peers and colleagues why you have been picked over the others? Process was rather transparent, then usually there is not too much fuzz. Then it's more this kind of having again this one-on-one sessions with everybody and say like, this is what the process was. So I have this role for the time being, and then come with something, a bit of an ask, and I need your help. Asking people for help is a good thing, by the way. But therefore, you have to plan your next steps in your onboarding and then make sure you ask one after the other for some small supporting thing that they could help you with. That does help. If it was unclear who gets promoted, why somebody gets the role over somebody else, then I think that is a managing up case. Then it's not on you to make that introduction, then it is on your boss to make the introduction, right? And then it's on your boss to explain why you have the role and set you up for success. I think that is then what you need to do. You need to ask for help from their boss. I think that would be my advice if it's not so transparent why you ended up in that role. Yeah. And that's a weird situation. That's quite a challenge. So acknowledge that it's a weird situation. That's step number one.
Great. Well, Petra, this has been an absolute masterclass in becoming a product leader, as we hoped it would be, as we were sure it would be. Um, I've already put a few links in the chat to if people want to connect with you or find out more about the leadership wheel. I've just dropped those in the chat again. And if you're watching on YouTube, these will be in the show notes below. Um,
I like.
but thank you very much for your time, and I do hope we get to do something like this again soon.
Yes, thanks everybody for joining and for these great questions. I love them.
Good.
Thank you, Ed.
Have a great evening, everyone. Hope to see you all soon. Bye.